Okay, now it's time for Tony Hawk's Proving Ground. With Tony Hawk's Proving Ground, Neversoft was definitely intent on taking what they had done for both American Wasteland and Project 8 and would try to expand on that. The story pretty much is the same as before. You play a character who is an unknown local skater and you have to go through various missions to progress through the storyline and work your way up the rankings. The story this time has been changed to 3 different types of modes: the rigor mode, the career mode, and the hardcore mode. Each mode differs in storyline as well as difficulty. The career mode I find to be the more interesting, but I'm also a fan of the rigor storyline as well, which is pretty cool. In terms of story, I have pretty mixed feelings about it. I don't mind them rehashing the same story over and over again, but if I had to give American Wasteland and Project 8 any bit of credit story-wise, it would be the fact that they were entertaining and very coherent for the most part, and considering how many directions the stories went in, being coherent was quite an accomplishment. However, with Proving Ground, by splitting it up into 3 modes, it's very incoherent with no real direction. Also, the story doesn't feel quite as long because of being split up. They seem to make up for it through missions that take an eternity to finish. It used to be you had to complete 1 mission to progress, however each mission in the game has at least 3 or 4 parts to it and it just drags on and on. In terms of new additions to the franchise, Proving Ground is very limited. They did add on to the Nail the Trick mode though. Nothing much, they just added manuals and grabs to the list. The manual part is quite interesting, but overall it's pretty much the same as before with a few tweaks. However, I do find the original Nail the Trick to still be the more fun of the 3. Also new is the new ability to take pictures and film certain tricks. Throughout each part of the open world, you'll sometimes see cameras and camcorders floating around. When you approach them, it gives you a trick that you have to do, and if you perform it correctly, then you succeed. It sounds simple enough, but it's really only the camcorder that's simple. The still camera is a pain in the ass. Instead of the game taking pictures for you like Project 8 did, Proving Ground gives you the responsibility of taking your own pictures. When you perform the trick, you see your character from the camera's perspective, which I'm sure sounded like a cool idea, but it comes off rather odd in the game. There are 2 problems with this idea in the game. First of all, no matter how many times you do it, it will catch you a bit off guard to see the camera switch to the still camera angle. That gets really confusing. What's even worse is that the frame rate takes a dive every time you enter that perspective. So yeah, I'm sure it sounded good on paper, but the final version is just a little annoying. Another feature added was kind of an editor mode with some of the missions. With some missions you need to add ramps or rails. With this you hit the select button and add them to the spot where you really need them. This mode reminds me a lot of the tools used for the park editor modes. It's actually really cool that they were able to incorporate it into the missions in the storyline. I think the only difficult part is actually remembering that you have this option with some missions. One mission particularly stands out in my mind. I was supposed to nail a trick across a street, and I kept trying to do it from the ground, and I totally forgot that I had the option to add a ramp in the spot where I really needed it. It wasn't until the 10th try that I actually remembered this option. It's definitely one of the better additions to the game. From a camera angle standpoint, the perspective was changed a little bit. The camera angle is noticeably different this time. Instead of just being a straight third-person perspective, which has been the angle since the franchise started, the angle is now closer and slightly moved right. This is actually a pretty poor perspective because there isn't a lot of things that you can see from this angle. I liked the farther straight angle because I could see everything around me for the most part. With this perspective, it's very hard to tell whether you're approaching a character you can talk to or not. It's also weird that the angle slightly shifts when you do a trick, which can get a little confusing. Graphically, the game looks alright. For some reason, Proving Ground looks like a downgrade from Project 8. The character models are not nearly as impressive and look less lifelike. The environments, while good, are not quite as good as they once were. They're detailed, but not quite to the extent of Project 8. However, if I had to give any credit to the game, the sound is awesome. However, the huge improvement over Project 8, though, is the frame rate. The frame rate was smoothed out a lot, and considering that the open world is noticeably larger than Project 8's open world, that's quite an accomplishment. The physics were also improved. The tricks are much easier to pull off, particularly the manual, which is easier to go into than it was in Project 8. The game is also not as ragdoll physics heavy as Project 8 was. Neversoft had a little too much fun with the ragdoll physics in Project 8 and thankfully toned it down for Proving Ground. So overall, Proving Ground is ambitious to say the least, but with missions that take too long, additions to the gameplay that fall flat, a terrible camera angle, and a visual look that doesn't live up to its predecessor, I think it's safe to say the Proving Ground falls a little bit short of the standards we were all expecting. It's not a terrible game by any means, but it just shows that Neversoft was running out of things to add to a franchise that was already stretched to its limits. Well, everyone, that's it for now. Thank you so much for listening, and I will see you next time.